Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about what's going on with gas prices and what we should expect in the future. So we are honored to have Sean Mason from Mason Trucking. He also was the vice president of Masco Petroleum, a large fuel distributor in the state that in 2020 was purchased by Petro Card. And he is going to be talking about what he's seeing from as a gas distributor, a fuel distributor, primarily in the diesel distribution industry. And then also, after he speaks for a bit, we'll have Isaac Kastama, who is a good friend of mine that I had the pleasure to work with in Seattle with the Washington Business Alliance. He is a contract lobbyist and represents several large emitters in the state and has been integral in the process over the years to create some state policy that recognize the economic impacts of different businesses in Washington. So this is not intended to be a big policy debate, more so informative about what has been passed and what is happening related to fuel prices, and then also how that impacts our costs of goods out here on the Olympic Peninsula. So with that, Sean, do you want to take it? And just if you'll put yourself on mute, and if we like to have this very interactive, so if you have questions, if you want to raise your hand, and I'll go ahead and call on you, or you can put your question in the chat. So with that, Sean, take it away. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. Excuse me. Former vice president of Masco Petroleum. We sold to Petro Card a couple years ago. So I am talking on behalf, putting on my hat of vice president of Masco Petroleum. My views and thoughts aren't representative of Petro Card, of who bought Masco Petroleum. I also own a trucking company called Mason Trucking. I do a lot of trucking up in throughout the Olympic Peninsula. It's about 15 trucks, and I use large consumer of diesel myself. I want to talk a little bit about our state's kind of infrastructure of fuel and the costs that kind of go along with that, and then I'll bump it to Isaac. I'm really curious what he has to say with what's going on in the legislature. But Washington State, there's 5 refineries in the state. There are 3 up north in Blaine, Ferndale area, and then there's 2 down in Tacoma, U.S. Oil and Sound Refining. So there's 5 refineries, and then there's about a 300-mile pipeline that also carries product from Ferndale through Tacoma. The pipeline runs through Fort Lewis for Jet A, so Fort Lewis can get their Jet A direct off the pipe, and the pipeline goes all the way down to Portland. Most of our crude from the state, well, all of our crude from the state is either getting railed in from North Dakota or barged down from Alaska. You know, the age of the infrastructure of all these refiners, I think the most recent one was mid-70s. So the infrastructure is 45, 50 years old, not getting any newer. And all these refiners go down for about a month a year for maintenance. But as it ages, we all know that the equipment will time out and more issues will pop up. Washington State, we are 3rd in the nation for how high our gas taxes are. We're 52 cents at the state level. another 18, 19 cents at the Fed level. The only two states that have more tax than Washington are California, pays a penny more, and Pennsylvania pays 6 cents more. Pennsylvania pays 58 cents state tax. So we're paying, right about 70 cents a gallon tax, roughly. It's a little under that, but roughly 70 cents a gallon tax. Throughout the state, those 5 refineries feed 1,800 gas stations statewide. Our state consumption in general has been overall been flat. Diesel's been down a little bit. Gas has actually been up a little bit, but with the flat to slightly declining consumption, obviously the state is having decreasing tax revenue, and Isaac will talk about probably the low carbon fuel standard and the cap and trade things going through the House and Senate right now. I am not up to speed on that, but I do know that they're in the pipeline, and I do know that it will add to our cost. Some major factors really influencing the gas and diesel price. I mentioned there's no new supply coming online. I mean, these 5 refineries I've already mentioned are old, they're dated. So we can't have any hiccups out of any of these refineries because it's really just in time inventory with all these refiners. The refiners kind of have zone pricing, is what they call it, just depending on location. The majors just have different zone pricings. Retail margins, of course, retail margins aren't obsessive. Usually, a majority of the cost is in the crude. So in a gallon of gas, about 45% of the cost of a gallon of gas is into the crude and would go to the crude supplier owner. The other 85% or 55%, excuse me, is combined into manufacturing, distribution, retail, and a lot of taxes. So that's about 50% of it. So just under half goes to crude, just over half goes to those other 5 variables. Additives for gasoline, transportation costs. A lot of people forget that there are seasonal shifts in what type of gasoline that these refiners can produce. There's a different grade of gas produced in the summer than in the winter, and the summer grade is more expensive. And then, of course, the political unrest. That's not helping at all. As far as expectations and what to think about, for the rest of this year exactly, is get used to expensive oil. I think over $100 oil is really here to stay. I think expect really volatile price swings. We're seeing, huge price swings, 20, 30, 40, 80 cents, sometimes during the day. Little things are being done. OPEC's increase in production. Our president's opening up some strategic reserves. But the president also blocked a lot of pipelines and knocked a lot of projects offline. And so our supply is what it is. Inflationary pressures, of course. And then just kind of a general rule of thumb, with crude hovering around $100, every 10 bucks in crude equates to roughly about 30 cents at the pump. On the trucking side of things, $5 diesel, $6 diesel takes the fun right out of the trucking business. Because there's very limited options. pass the cost on, which is done, but it can't be done as rapidly as these prices are increasing. Very limited electric or hybrid options in the trucking business. There are just very, very little options. The trucks have to run on diesel, and I think there'll be some hybrid options coming down the pike. Maybe some autonomous options on freeway driving from distribution center to distribution center. But I don't think you'll see anything autonomous or electric outside of major highways. Isaac, can I bump it to you on some of the tax stuff? And that'll probably spur a couple of questions that I'm going to have.
Great. Hey, real quick, I had a couple questions for you about what you shared. So Sean, you said that about 55% of the cost goes to manufacturing, distribution, and taxes. And you said there were 5 components. I caught 3 of them.
Yeah, manufacturing, distribution, retail margins.
Okay. Okay.
Taxes.
And so if the crude, I mean, it was what, $40 a barrel before, and now it's up over 100. So does the manufacturing get to, get an increase equivalent to what they're paying for the crude? I mean, instead of an X amount?
No. So this goofy business is a cents per gallon business. So when there's an increase in crude, the profit is going to whoever owns the crude in the ground. The manufacturers still makes whatever they make, 10 cents, 15 cents a gallon, whether it's $10 crude or $110 crude. So it's in the manufacturer's best interest, in a distributor's best interest, to have prices low. You're going to have an increased margin the lower prices are. Okay.
And so so right now it's about 55 cents for that portion when the crude is about $100 a barrel. Is that right?
Yeah, if we're going to use an example, yeah, if crude's $100 a barrel, 55 bucks of that's going to whoever owns that crude. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And then you talked about the seasonal shift in grade, summer versus winter. Why is that? Why does that happen? What's that about?
It's a state mandate for pollution.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it might even be a federal mandate, but it is a mandate for pollution. I can get more specific on it, but I think it's April 1st to end of September or something. And the summer grade is a little bit more expensive, and I don't know why.
Okay. So I see a comment and a question in the chat. Maybe you know this. Mike says, is it my imagination or has there been a significant decrease in tanker traffic in the strait? Why would that be if it's the case? Do you know?
No, I do not know. No, I know that a lot of the crude in Tacoma is barged in rather than shipped in. So I don't know if those ships perhaps are going to Seattle or Everett. I'm not sure. So I can't speak to that.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. No worries. Okay. So Isaac, you want to take it and you can share screen. I know you prepared some slides, so thank you for that.
Sure. How do I do that? That's the question here. Okay, yeah, I have the ability. Thank you.
Great.
Well, good morning, everyone. Really happy to be here. This is not my first time tuning into a coffee with Colleen, so I've enjoyed this forum. So really did appreciate the offer to come and speak and share a little bit about these policies, I'm going to focus on low carbon fuel standard and then the cap and invest or cap and trade bill that passed the legislature last year. Both those policies are currently in implementation at the Department of Ecology, and they will begin going into effect about this time next year. So there's still time to get your opinions into the department and contribute to that rulemaking process. And so I encourage everyone to do so. Just so I have a sense of who's with me today, I'm going to, for the most part, assume that I'm talking to fuel users. Those are kind of indirectly regulated entities by these policies, not directly regulated entities by these policies. And I'll tell you the distinction. So back when last couple cycles, the state of Washington was presented with 2 carbon tax initiatives. Those were policies that set a price for emissions that was rationalized back to the pump, and it was something that was very easy to say, okay, this is the downstream impact everyday fuel customers. The difference with these 2 policies the legislature has passed is that they are really focused upstream. They're looking at the big, heavy, what they categorize as emitters, and then the producers of the product. So, for most of us that, fill up our tank or even have a fleet of vehicles or, operate a business, an agricultural business, you will have impacts related to these policies, but they're not necessarily compliance impacts. You're not going to be seeing a bill on a receipt. You're not going to be interacting with the Department of Ecology. All these policies are looking at entities like Cherry Point Refinery, a large industrial facility. In Seattle area, you have like Nucor Steel or Ash Grove. In Spokane, you have Kaiser Aluminum. Some food processors down in the Tri-Cities. Those are the entities that really will be engaging at that level. So because of that, I give you that context because we're going to be talking about indirect price impacts, which are inherently more complicated to predict. And so when you consider these policies, there's been a number of reports, and I want to show you the information that the legislature considered. So you can see what they saw. But with all of this comes a lot of unknowns. These are what are called market-based policies. That means they're responsive to what's happening in the market. So to the degree that there's less expensive solutions to reduce emissions that become available more quickly than people might expect, like electric vehicles, costs may be lower. To the degree that those solutions are further off, costs could be higher. And I just want to give you kind of a baseline of what to expect, give you some optimistic thoughts when it comes to prices, and I'll give you some pessimistic ones. And in the end, it'll be up for every entity to decide and figure out how they want to respond to a policy like this. The general thrust is that this is, state of Washington is moving very aggressively toward, putting a lot of incentives on the table and then a lot of regulations on the table to encourage a switch to electrification, hydrogen, lower carbon intense fuels. I think the incentive piece is where you're going to hear a lot of energy over the next several years, which is as these programs generate revenue and as companies that are regulated start looking for investments that can reduce their compliance obligation. That's where you're going to see a lot of projects and charging infrastructure and carbon capture companies and all sorts of battery manufacturers. Those sort of things are going to be the source of conversation, and that's all about how do you really put in place the infrastructure that enables the effective achievement of these goals at the lowest possible cost. So I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Let's see if I can present here. Oh, it's because it's over here. So there's two policies we're talking about. I'm going to give you a compare and contrast. Don't be overwhelmed by the text. I'm going to walk you through it. So we have a clean fuel standard and cap and invest. And if you think about these two policies, one is coming at it from this end, the other is coming at it from this end. And I'm talking about what are the hardest things and most expensive things to decarbonize, and what are the cheapest, easiest things to decarbonize. And your clean fuel standard is coming at it from the high end, and your cap and invest system is coming at it from the low end. And as these policies mature over the next couple of decades, you see these things converging. It becomes less expensive to do the things that today are really hard to do. And we've done all the cheap things, so there's less cheap things to do. So you think on that, that these are not one policies that operate just in one moment in time. It's going to adapt, it's going to move, this market's going to mature, and you're going to see these two policies get closer and closer together. So when we consider the low carbon fuel standard, think about it like, we've got a big pie chart. This is the quantity of fuel. Low carbon fuel standard applies to a small quantity of fuel, little piece of the pie, but it has a very high cost obligation. And that's because it tells you that you have to reduce your emissions in the transportation sector. It doesn't give you the choice to do other things, other activities. It says to an entity, you got to find a reduction in the transportation sector, no matter, at a higher cost, because it costs more money. So I'm going to use a term called tons or dollar per ton. That's the metric that everybody in this space sort of uses to rationalize cost. And I'm going to compare that in the clean fuel standard context to the cap and invest context. So for a clean fuel standard, the cost to reduce a ton of emissions may be closer to $200 per ton. Okay. If we go over cap and invest applies to the whole pie. Okay, the whole pie, not the sliver. And it applies a lower cost, but it's to the whole pie. So, you're having a broader impact, but it's a lower overall cost associated with that program. You also have the option to reduce emissions in other sectors. That's why the cost is lower, because if it's too high to reduce emissions in transportation, you can go over to the industrial sector. You can go over to electric sector. You can go to natural gas. You can find those cheaper reductions that reduces the overall cost. The clean fuel standard does not generate any money for the state. So it's a regulatory policy. It's a requirement, and entities have to achieve it. Cap and invest program does. And the reason that they call it cap and invest is the concept is that in order to reduce the cost of the program on complying entities, the revenue that's raised from the program is supposed to go back at reducing demand. And we'll talk about why that does happen and why that sometimes doesn't happen. I talked about that convergence. So think about how, over time, it gets cheaper to reduce transportation sector emissions. So that program, clean fuel standard, is going to come down. Cap and invest, we've done the cheap stuff. Now we're working on the really hard stuff. So we see prices to comply with the clean fuel standard likely to go down over time. And when I say over time, I mean over decades. It's about a 25-year program. And then you have the credits in the cap and invest system likely to go up because it's getting harder. There are exemptions, a couple of which are very relevant to the peninsula. The clean fuel standard does not apply to aviation, watercraft, and then through 2028, it does not apply to fuel to transport logs, timber harvest, and agricultural special dyed fuels. And the cap and invest program also does not apply to aviation, watercraft, and agriculture. So I'm going to pause really quickly and see if there's a question before I move on to some scenarios around cost impacts.
Yeah, Isaac, what percentage of the transportation sector currently represents the whole of emissions? Because our state's different from other states because we primarily rely on hydropower. So other states that use coal, they have a much bigger carbon emission sector based on their energy emissions, but our power sector is cleaner. And so our transportation is higher relative to our total. What percentage is the transportation sector currently?
Now, depending on how you define transportation, so its broadest definition gets you just over 50%. And the expectation is that's actually going to grow as a percentage of our emissions over time. That's because the state is turning down coal. We're going to be eliminating that from our portfolio by 2025 under a previous agreement through the closure of Centralia, and also the CETA policy, the 100% clean energy policy that just passed, that phases out imported coal by 2025. So, we'll see that transport share grow. On-road gasoline is smaller. I don't have the figure right in front of me, but I think it's more in the 30% category. That is greater than the rest of the country. The country tends to be in thirds. And so a lot of the national dialogue is really, as you know, is dominated by electric sector decarbonization. And we're just further along in that path, thanks to our hydropower system and also our nuclear plant.
Okay. And also, why did the aviation sector get to be exempted for, and are they exempted just through 2028, or are they exempted forever?
Yeah, there's a issue of two things. Federal preemption is a point that was raised by those in the aviation sector. That's the federal government, because you have these crafts going from states and other jurisdictions. They do not want states imposing unique sorts of costs on fuel related to aircraft. So that was done more from a pragmatic perspective than a policy give.
Okay, and that was the same for watercraft then?
There's issues related to watercraft as well. The question, the valid question was, could you do interstate? And I think that was one where you'd have to set up a pretty elaborate system to isolate interstate aviation and watercraft from international or multi-state.
Okay.
Interesting.
Thanks. And I don't know if you see this, but Jim McIntyre has a stand
I do.
up.
Isaac, thanks for being here. It would help me to conceptualize this a little bit better if you could, the second line on both sides, clean fuels and cap and invest, talks about, on the one hand, credits that are tradable, deficits and credits, and then on the other side, permits. Are the two equivalent to each other? And who exactly, or what kind of entities exactly possess and are able to trade these credits, deficits, permits, so on and so forth?
That's a great question. And this is one of the key distinctions between both these programs and a carbon tax. Carbon tax is like a sales tax or a gas tax. It's a usage fee. In both these programs, I'll start with CAP. You're actually buying a certificate, okay, that gives you the essentially the right to emit a ton of greenhouse gases. So when you go in as an entity and you buy this, you're buying a permit to emit. That's disconnected from when you use it. So, you could buy a permit and hold that permit and not use that permit for 15 years or as long as you wanted to. And so you could also, once you own that permit, you can resell it to another party. You could, or turn it in if you have a compliance obligation. So you have options, and that allows, a marketplace to emerge that does help to mitigate costs. That's one of the ideas here, is that rather than just saying, you emitted, here's your charge. You're receiving this permit that you now becomes an asset on your balance sheet. You paid for it, it has a cost, and that cost goes to state. But this now gives you something that you can make judgments about. We also have 4-year compliance windows. So you don't have to make up your mind too quickly about what you want to do with it. So when they look at your compliance obligation, they say, okay, how much emissions did you emit? Over that period, you have to turn in this number of compliance units in order to be, legal. But you have a lot of flexibility, and those price of those units, it's moving up and down. Generally, it's going to be going upward is the way the program is designed. So there's a potentially a financial advantage to buying a permit, holding it, seeing the prices increase in the market, and reselling it. This is closer, if you're familiar with the state water banking system, it's similar in nature to that. And that's where this is where it gets very challenging to determine cost impacts for downstream entities, because if you just take it on its surface and say, well, it's a straight, the price of the permit is just passed through, you're missing all that arbitrage that really does ultimately benefit consumers and also create some competition in the marketplace. Same thing on the clean fuel side. An entity, the obligation is determined in a different way, but it's the same point, which is, the goal is to reduce the intensity of carbon intensity of fuels. So, if you can, onboard more, biofuels, lower carbon fuels, biodiesel, even some, natural gas, electrification, you're generating credits that you can apply to those deficits, which is your obligation. And if you produce more, green things than you need to meet your obligation, you can turn around and sell them to another party. So that just give you a sense of the market dynamics that are taking place in both these programs.
Great, thanks.
All right. The fun stuff, or not the fun stuff. This is the scary stuff. So this is the information the legislature had at its disposal related to what do these programs cost and what to expect. There's this first chart up here. These two charts are looking at the low carbon fuel standard specifically. And as I said, these programs they start and end in different places. And one feature of the low carbon fuel standard is that it does take some time to ramp up. So it's a very gradual program. So in your initial years, just go down to the bottom chart here. This is Oregon's low carbon fuel standard. And you see in those early years when the requirement is rather low, it's a pretty small, if not negligible amount of increase. You're talking, what's that? Less than a penny, going up to almost 4 cents in 2020. They're going to release the next report April 15th. So we'll see what that is for 2021 pretty soon. So it starts out gradually, but that slope does ramp up. And so when you get to the top chart, what they're describing here is what happens in a scenario where you've essentially reached the major milestones in the policy that our bill would hit in 2030 and again in 2035. So these are projections from California Air Resources Board and their program. When they hit a 20% reduction, which I'll get you the next chart, you can compare across states what this looks like. But these are serious amounts of money in these later years. So in the early period, you don't really notice it much, but as time goes on, the potential for impact is there. What makes these projections challenging is what do we know about the year 2030? We know a lot less, of course, than we know today. And so, how these markets evolve will influence those prices and ultimately if we pay them. And then the other thing that's happening is as you're getting up to these levels, there's just a huge amount of incentive that is built into these that then gets placed on a gallon of renewable diesel. So you could have a $1.50 a gallon incentive on renewable diesel versus paying 18 cents more on a traditional diesel. So there's a cost component, and then there's the other component, which is the market catalyzing other options that are lower cost. There's much less on cap and trade, frankly, related to price impacts. But the LAO, which is the legislative office out of California, estimates that that program is currently costing California residents around 23 cents a gallon. And their LCFS currently costing 18 cents a gallon. And I'll show you why in this next chart. So Washington is not a first mover. So we're actually a bit late to the party here when it comes to low carbon fuel standard. And we see across, this is California, Oregon, Canada, and Washington. So the red is California, blue is Oregon, green is Canada, and the purple is Washington. And these are the slopes of how strict the policy is going to get over time. And so if we look at California, here we are in 2022, they're at the reason why they're hitting 18 cents is, because their policy has a pretty sharp curve. They're well into it. They're over a decade into this policy. They're in this spot right here. Oregon, pretty, a newer policy, but, at the same time, they're less aggressive. So you see why their prices right now might be lower as well. Their actual requirement is lower. Canada is the same. Washington, and this is where I think really delays the price impact related to low carbon fuel standard in Washington. So as we consider the current situation with fuels, it's just, we're going to be moving so slowly over this period that it's unlikely that those price impacts are going to be felt immediately or even in the next several years. We're going to be talking about relatively low levels of impact, but then it does get lower. And this is where you get out to the 2030s. We start, looking more like California. Eventually we reach the same spot. So, I think that's a really long glide path.
Yeah, Isaac, I see on the x-axis, it's percent. Is that carbon intensity reduction from baseline?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So by 2035, a 20% reduction. What does that essentially equal in dollars? What's your guess? Or percent?
Well, I would go
gallon.
back to this chart. So I would go back here. So here's your 20% reduction scenario.
Okay.
And this is what California uses. Now, granted, California achieves 20% in 2030. We're achieving it in 2035. So there's some market assumptions that are built into that. But if we were to hit 20%, based on this data here, you'd be looking at those sort of impacts in that year.
Okay, thank you.
I would add that at 10%, so one thing we have is there's a policy trigger, there's a review in 2031 of the policy when it hits 10%. So, before it can move on to 20, there's a review at 10. So, these are really wide ranges, but you do get a sense for the scale. Real quickly, I'm going to talk about the Climate Commitment Act. This is the Cap and Invest, Cap and Trade Bill. This is a complex chart. I'm just going to explain it real quickly. This is essentially where all the money goes that's raised. And, one of the things that if you followed the transportation package that just passed, it was often said it did not include a gas tax. It does include significant revenue from the cap and invest system. And in fact, that's these three buckets here in shades of blue, that all goes to that Move Ahead Washington transportation package. That's a pretty significant. It comes out to be, almost 5.4 billion. So, there's other buckets of things that are remaining to be allocated, but frankly, most of the money from the program over the next 16 years is now specified for use in that package. Interestingly, there's costs on utilities that are imposed by the program. However, that money never enters the state coffers. It's retained by utilities for investment under the direction of the UTC. So, the state just doesn't see that money. It's $3 billion the state doesn't see. So here's if we want to, sort of understand what is the state fiscal writers, not, to the degree they're clairvoyant, what do they expect to happen? Don't try to read this. I'm just showing you that it's there and I can follow up with it. But, here's their master chart that says, how many allowances they think are going to be sold in the given year. What do they think they're going to go for? How much money they expect to raise. Here's I just kind of zoomed in there. So you get a sense of, on an annual basis, how much money the state thinks it's going to receive from cap and invest. It's pretty consistent over time. So this is my point earlier. So the quantity of fuel that's being covered by the program is reduced, but the price goes up, and that means the revenue stays pretty flat through the 2040s. So that's a fair amount of money. That's largely expected to come from transportation fuels, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Like I said, all the utility money is retained, so that never enters the state. Industrial facilities through about 2030 have received a pretty high allocation of what's called free allowances or free permits, so that their actual costs to comply with the program are expected to be fairly low. I mean, they'll have internal costs, but they're not going to be sending money to the state. That'll it's sort of a form of retention. It's substantively different than for the utilities, but it's similar. So really, it's going to be largely transportation fuels that make up this amount. Go ahead, Jim. I see your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question, Isaac. Are these then-year dollars, nominal dollars, or do they take take inflation into account?
That's a great question. I'd have to look at the note here. I think it's nominal.
My guess is they haven't anticipated future inflation or anything like that. So these are then-year dollars.
Well, and there's a very active debate about how much these allowances, these permits, are really going to cost.
Right.
If you look at globally, we step back. I mean, these are systems in place not just in California, but this is the system of choice in Europe and in Asia, increasingly in other countries. And so we have this. We can look at what do these permits in a competitive marketplace tend to do, and we're assuming relatively. I think I would characterize it as low. Assumptions in these years about what the value of these are, and there's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of trading that happens. It's sort of like a stock market. It is like a stock market, and so these revenue numbers, if you follow California's experience, the chart is boom, 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 generally trending upwards, but it's like tracking the Dow, and that's going to influence the money that the state ultimately receives. And, again, it will get complex to figure out what does that mean for you at the pump, because some of that trading and speculation has a downward impact on the ultimate prices paid by consumers. But, the thing to note is that, these there is an inherent cost. You can't take money out of the state and bring it to the state government without somebody paying. And within that system, there are going to be entities that, figure this out. They know how to play the game well. They have trading desks. They can, they're in a business that allows them to project, and, they make big bets. They say, okay, we're going to invest in a new facility so we can capture the value of these allowances. So, this is where entrepreneurs and innovation are going to, determine the success or failure of this program. It's Are we going to see that investment? And I guess I would just end on, these are just a couple of reflections. I've said some of these, but I think probably the most promising aspect of why this might, turn out to work is that you are seeing a fundamental shift with how some of the oil majors are approaching this. We just saw Chevron acquire REG. That's the renewable fuels company, and BP's launched its net zero pledge, and they're doing some very serious investing in this space. I think the most sort of surprising and interesting turn is how equity markets are rewarding companies that make these commitments and invest big. I mean, it's just you look at the market value of Tesla and Rivian, and even what has happened to Ford stock recently because of its EV push. So there's just a tremendous from the investment community. There's a tremendous push on this. So that's potentially going to lead to different outcome for Washington, because when California started this, they were alone. It was a lonely time. So we're starting this at a period of alignment with capital markets, and we'll see what happens with interest rates. But it's an interesting moment. The one thing that hangs in the back of my mind is that Washington's cap is pretty ambitious. We go further than California, and I think it's going to be bumpy for the first couple of years because it's new. We've got some entities that I think are really ready to comply with this law. They've got that strategy in place. Other entities that are going to have to figure it out, and these are big policies. So we'll I hate to leave with a cliffhanger on what happens with prices, but we could see all sorts of things. So the good news here is that hopefully this starts kicking off when the current crisis is resolved to some degree. This will be next year. There's even a reporting period for low carbon fuel standard, which means that some of the prices related to that could be delayed all the way till impacts could be delayed till 2024. Entities have all year to buy these allowances. They don't have to buy them in March for the cap and trade system. So, this won't be a situation like with the gas tax where, when it goes into effect, there's your 5 cents on the tank.
Right.
It's going to be a different process. So that's what I got. Any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, Jim has his hand up, and also Lena has a question.
Lena, you go ahead of me.
Okay, thank you. I work with several businesses, including log truck drivers, and I'm a co-owner of an excavating company and work with couple others. And I know that some of the log truck rates particularly are established by the state. And in the past, when we've had increased fuel costs, there has been a fuel surcharge added to the cost that the trucker ultimately is able to receive to help offset the fuel charges, the increase in fuel charges for those entities. My question is, how is this determined? As far as I know, there hasn't been a fuel surcharge added by the state at this point to the state, log hauling jobs. And I'm wondering how this is determined and if we are expecting that in the future.
So there will be a rule related to the exemption in the low carbon fuel standard. There will be a rulemaking. I'm not sure that probably is going to come under the Department of Revenue. I have not seen an announcement about that, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. So as it relates to that exemption, there will be a rulemaking, and that'll create a credit of some type against the price increases related to the low carbon fuel standard, at least through 2028. I don't think there's a similar, I don't believe there's a similar sort of offset for the cap and invest program.
So are you referring to a Department of Revenue credit against excise tax returns, or I'm confused because
So-
I'm talking about an actual fuel surcharge that's added.
Oh,
So the trucker, instead of getting, whatever it is per ton, they also get an additional fuel surcharge to help them cover the cost of the the increased fuel prices.
so I'm unaware of there being any fuel surcharge being applied to truckers as part of this program. My understanding is they are not directly regulated entities, so it just gets rolled up into what they're paying at the pump. They wouldn't necessarily see it.
Go ahead, Jim.
Last question, mostly out of ignorance, really, but I was looking at some bills a few weeks earlier, and I noticed that there was a bill that updated the cap and invest bill that passed last year. And in that, it was a huge bill, lots of language,
Yeah.
which I completely didn't understand, but there was a sentence in there that said the expectation is that there will be an annual bill that kind of moves the knobs and dials in the cap and invest market. So the question that jumped into my head at that point was, how stable is this market, and can investment assumptions made today really be relied on in the future if there's going to be this annual series of tweaks to the regulatory nature of the cap and invest market? How does that work, Isaac? Do you or Sean, either one, can you settle my anxiety about this thing actually working for people that put money into it?
Yeah, I think you're referring to the setting of annual allowance budgets. So that's every year the Department of Ecology has to determine how many permits to put out for sale. And so, that process is right now in rulemaking to determine what that looks like. That is probably you nailed it. It's one of the most important mechanisms in the bill that has an impact on price. And we don't know today how that's going to work because it's still in the rulemaking process. And it's one that, folks in my world are going to be commenting on, because how ecology determines, the release of those permits is that's your supply demand. There you go. And the tighter it is, more competition, higher prices, looser it is, that might have a moderating effect. The way that California has looked at that is, valuing stability with sort of a gradual increase in price, and try to use that tool to avoid shocks. But we're going to find out. I mean, that's part of the dynamic here that we just don't have enough information at this point. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, as Isaac probably knows, this was a highly controversial policy. And I think the controversy was on the policy. Washington emits so little compared to other places in the world like China, but there was an analysis by NARA, which is a reliable consulting firm, which we're looking at. They used a number of different assumptions, and they pegged and we call it cap and tax, at 58 cents a gallon in 2024 cost on a conservative estimate. They had much higher estimates too. Diesel at 66 cents per gallon. So, and then that ramps up to 2030. So on this conservative estimate, cap and tax, 77 cents a gallon on gasoline, 88 cents by 2030. And then estimating that the cap or we call it the high cost fuel standard, because we're looking at the California modeling at 22 cents. So in effect, if we're just looking at gas, 77 cents by 2030 with 22 cents low carbon, you're effectively looking at $1 increase per gallon by 2030, according to this estimate.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with NARA analysis, and I think there's interesting points made in there. I think what I tend to look at as a very reliable low bar. So what is it? What is the conservative estimate? Is take a look at the fiscal note, which is a little lower. It comes in lower than NERA, but it's still not an insignificant number. I mean, here's your low price floor scenario. Again, assuming that I believe the NERA study does is just assumes that arbitrage game doesn't reduce prices much. So this is just what you pay for a permit. So here's 20 cents or $20 a ton, getting up to 33 in 2030, 51 in 2036, $67 in 2040. So and the way these allowance prices work is what you pay at auction may not be what you actually end up paying, because there's a secondary market. So somebody may pay prices that high in the NERA study. Does that mean everybody pays prices that high in the NERA study? No, it's a fluctuating stock market where entities have to pick, they're going to have to make those business judgments. So I think the NERA studies is instructive. I think it's we get too far out in this program, it's kind of becomes a fool's errand to predict what will happen. I think what we do know is that it's going to have an impact. We need to monitor it, be sensitive to it. And my take on this is, to the degree that you're generating revenue, you better turn it around and put it back into reducing the compliance cost of these entities. And to the degree Olympia just takes it and spends it on other stuff, I think the aspect of the Move Ahead Washington program that invested over $1 billion of this money in bike ped, that has very little benefit back. Doesn't the state's own analysis is that's just a tiny emissions piece you could achieve by bike ped. And that's it. Meanwhile, if you took that money and you directed it back toward helping some of these large industrial entities reduce their emissions, or helped replace truck fleets, or worked on projects that grant projects, incentives, you could really help people comply with this program. And I think that's something that the state needs to focus on doing.
So Isaac, I put a question in the chat that your first slide, after your title slide, said 2028 does not apply to fuel in the low carbon fuel standard, does not apply to fuel to transport logs, timber harvest, and agriculture. So first question about that, how will those industry sectors receive their exemption from that? Because won't it just be, here's the price of diesel, and if you're just a regular truck driver, you have to pay the regular rate. But if you are taking a load of logs, then you get this exemption. And so how will that be done? And then also, what level, how much of a jump should they be expecting to see per gallon in 2028 by your best guess?
Well, so we're going to find this is what isn't going to go to rulemaking at the Department of Revenue. I believe they're going to have to figure out what the value of that credit is. I'd say it's, if you look at our sort of what to expect in the early years, it's going to be relatively small credit, given that it expires in 2028. I mean, the time when that credit's really going to provide value is those later years when the price impacts are likely to be much higher. But the state will conduct a similar study like they have in Oregon right here. And, that value will be applied. Department of Revenue will establish credit that will be applied, that will compensate those industries based on that study. So 2028, I don't know if this looks like it's, kind of follow that curve. 2028, what is it? We're under 10%. So we're somewhere like 8% around there. So here's your costs associated at a 10% reduction, these estimates.
So Lena asked if that was only for off-highway fuel, or is it also for fuel that's not colored?
Let me send the language to you, Colleen, and maybe we can, that way
Okay.
she just has it.
Okay. Great, thanks. And so Jeff James has a question. Jeff, do you want to ask that? Jeff
Yeah,
has
sorry,
asked.
there's a lot of buttons here. So yeah, I'm just wondering, has Olympia talked about parallel either regulations or laws, or at least a basic plan to apply increased fees for electric or hybrid transportation to account for their wear and tear on the infrastructure? I mean, I'm hearing, the overall revenue going to WashDOT to maintain, to replace culverts, to repave the roads and everything through diesel and gasoline. But what about the other vehicles that, with their weight? I mean, they all have 4 tires too. So how are they paying for their fair share?
Yeah, I mean, I think they actually, I don't know if it passed, but it passed the Senate was the bill to lower fees on electric vehicles. So, we've traditionally have had a fee that was designed to bring equivalency for, not paying gas tax. I think that's been lowered. So, if we really do hit a world where all new vehicles are electric in 2030, the state's gonna have to find a mechanism to make up that loss in transportation revenue somehow. So I think it's a very valid point, but I don't know that there's at this point a feeling of there hasn't been the momentum to put in place at this early stage that those sorts of fees.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like Sean has a question.
Yeah, my question, I mean, these two programs, there's no freeze on the gas tax as far as the legislator being able to raise the gas tax, correct? I mean, price is going to go up 15, 20, 30 cents here the next year or two, but it's not like they still can't reduce the gas tax, correct?
Yeah, that's still exists, separate mechanism. They can still do it. And California has done it while having both these programs.
And how much is the current gas tax per gallon? Is it 49 cents?
Yeah, let me find it. It's like 74, including the federal tax. It's like 38 to 42 cents.
Okay. Yeah, so this would be on top of that. Jim.
It's 49.4 cents.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, okay, well, yeah, it goes up over time, and our gas in our state will be more than in other states. So I think that's just important for businesses that are reliant or in the transportation industry and reliant on, goods that they are selling, and that, they need to be planning for this.
Yeah,
As
I
much as
think
possible.
it will be really interesting how other states evolve. I mean, there's Oregon's has been looking at the cap and trade bill for the last several cycles. BC has a carbon tax and a low carbon fuel standard. California has both these programs, and you're just seeing most of the West Coast refinery infrastructure bearing these costs, and so it's it's really a different world than a couple of years ago.
Have you heard of trucking companies that are creating hybrid or electric vehicle trucks?
Locally, PACCAR is really the, to use a pun, the driver here. I mean, they're just doing a phenomenal amount of investment in hybrid and electric and autonomous trucks. So there's some cool things coming down the pipeline a couple years out. I mean, it's to get to that commercial availability. I would say that California has put some serious incentives, many magnitudes higher than anything I've ever heard contemplated up in Olympia. I think it was like 500 million toward electric trucks. I mean, they're just really onboarding these, both electric and hydrogen and hybrid. So I think that you're going to see it. it's coming soon. The ports of Seattle and Tacoma in particular are really investing in building out that infrastructure.
Okay, well, great. Hey, thank you so much, Sean and Isaac, for presenting today. We went over by a bit. I'm going to go ahead and